You know, the universe is just unimaginably vast, filled with trillions of star systems. And yet, for all our searching, we've found no conclusive evidence of intelligent life anywhere but here. This deep cosmic silence has been a fundamental puzzle for scientists for a very long time. And a recent paper attempts to bring a fresh statistical perspective to this very old question.
Where is everybody? It's a simple question, but it's one of the most profound in science. It was famously asked by the physicist Enrico Fermi, and it gets right to the heart of what we call the Fermi Paradox. The math suggests the universe should be absolutely teeming with civilizations. But when we look out, we see, well, nothing. So today we're going to dig into a paper that offers one possible and pretty startling statistical explanation for this contradiction.
One of the most compelling ideas to explain this silence is something called the Great Filter Hypothesis. The theory goes that somewhere on the long road from simple life to a starfaring civilization, there's at least one step that's almost impossibly hard to get through: a filter. The really crucial question for us then is this: is that filter in our future, or have we, against all odds, already made it through?
So here's how we're going to break down the paper's argument. First, we'll look at why the author decides to focus on a filter in our past. Then, we'll get into the methodology, which means using Earth as our one and only case study. After that, we'll walk through the incredibly improbable timeline of events that had to happen for us to be here, and finally, we'll cover the really important boundaries of this conclusion and what it might all mean for our place in the cosmos.
The central mission of this paper is really to challenge the popular idea of a future filter, some kind of impending doom that awaits all advanced civilizations. Instead, it sets out to explore a different possibility. What if the hardest parts are already over? What if the real test was locked away in the deep history of our own planet?
So why look to the past? Well, the author's reasoning is that for a filter to explain the cosmic silence, it has to be almost perfectly effective. Things like nuclear war or rogue AI, as devastating as they might be, probably aren't universally destructive enough to wipe out every single member of a species every time on every planet. This leads the author to a different idea. Maybe the true filter isn't about destruction, but about creation. Maybe the long, winding sequence of biological and geological accidents that led to us is just that unbelievably rare.
Okay, so if you're going to test an idea that big, how do you even start? We don't exactly have a galaxy full of civilizations to survey. So the paper takes a really interesting approach. It performs a detailed case study on the only data point we have, the evolutionary history of our own planet, Earth, trying to pinpoint those key improbable events and actually calculate their likelihood.
Now, before we get into the numbers, there's something we absolutely have to make clear. This analysis comes from what's called a preprint paper. That means it's been shared with the scientific community for discussion, but it has not yet gone through the formal, rigorous peer review process.
And this is just as important. The study uses a sample size of 1, just our planet. That means we're basically looking at a single success story and trying to figure out the odds from that. So you have to remember, the conclusions we're about to see are statistical estimates based on a very specific set of assumptions. They are not and cannot be definitive proof. Understanding that limitation is absolutely key to interpreting what comes next. The whole analysis kind of hinges on a core assumption the author calls the 30% rule. Here's the idea. Our sun is slowly, gradually getting brighter. The paper calculates that if our entire evolutionary timeline, from the very beginning to us, had taken just 30% longer, the sun would have heated up so much that it would have made Earth uninhabitable. This creates a very narrow window of opportunity for us to show up, and that window is used as a kind of benchmark to identify the events that were absolutely critical for our timely arrival. All right, now that we understand the methodology and its limitations, let's look at the actual data. The paper identifies 4 sequential events in Earth's history that it argues were not just important, but were highly improbable and necessary filters that we had to pass through.
These 4 proposed filters are: first, the specific setup of our solar system; second, the ancient massive collision that formed our moon; third, the evolutionary leap that took life from the sea onto land; and finally, the very specific series of events that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs.
The first filter is our cosmic address. The paper estimates the odds of getting a star like our sun in the right part of the galaxy with 8 planets and a giant protector like Jupiter to shield us from asteroids. The probability is calculated to be about 2 in 10 billion.
Next up is the Theia collision. Now, this wasn't just any old impact. The paper argues that a very specific type of collision was needed to create our unusually large moon.
That moon is crucial. It stabilizes our planet's wobble, creates tides, and might have even kicked off the plate tectonics essential for complex life. The odds of such a precise, life-enabling event are estimated at just 1 in a trillion.
The third filter is that critical move from the water to the land. What I think is so cool here is how you can literally see the gradual change from fins into limbs in the fossil record. The paper's point is that this was not some inevitable progression. It was actually pushed along by a series of mass extinctions, possibly triggered by a nearby supernova that cleared out ecosystems and put intense evolutionary pressure on our distant ancestors to adapt to a new world.
Now, while this was still a very improbable event, the odds of these specific extinctions happening are calculated to be much higher than the others, around 3.6 in 10,000. It was an absolutely crucial step for sure, but according to this analysis, it wasn't the biggest hurdle.
And that brings us to the fourth filter. The extinction of the dinosaurs wasn't just one asteroid. It was a whole sequence of events. The paper highlights massive volcanic eruptions that were already stressing the planet, followed by the famous Chicxulub impact hitting a particularly sulfur-rich area, and then maybe even another giant impact called Shiva. This specific 1-2-3 punch was catastrophic for the dinosaurs, but critically, it allowed our small mammalian ancestors to survive and eventually take over.
The probability of that exact sequence of catastrophes happening in just the right order at just the right locations is, well, it's staggeringly low. The paper calculates it at about 6.5 in a quadrillion. The argument is simple. Without that specific chain of cosmic bad luck for the dinosaurs, mammals probably would have never gotten their chance.
So what happens when you multiply the probabilities of these 4 independent sequential filters? You get this number, an estimated probability of about 4.7 times 10 to the negative 40th power. To put it simply, that is the paper's statistical estimate for the odds of a technological civilization like ours popping up in any given star system. It's a number so small it's hard to even comprehend.
Okay, a number like that can easily be misunderstood. So it's absolutely vital that we're precise about what a conclusion like this does, and just as importantly, what it does not show. We need to explore the boundaries of this analysis.
First and foremost, this does not prove we're alone. It's a statistical argument from one single example. The probability estimates themselves are up for debate and could change with new data. The analysis also leans on some big assumptions. For instance, the principle of mediocrity, the idea that we're a typical example of how a civilization forms. And a really big one. It assumes that a mammal-like evolutionary path is the only way to get to intelligence, which, well, that might not be true at all.
So, with all those important caveats in mind, where do these findings fit into the broader scientific conversation about life in the universe? This research doesn't exist in a vacuum. It actually provides a new, quantitative line of reasoning for a pretty well-known hypothesis.
Specifically, the paper's conclusion lines up very neatly with the rare Earth hypothesis. This is the idea that the conditions needed for simple, microbial life might actually be pretty common out there in the galaxy. But the long, incredibly specific, and stable sequence of events that you need for complex, intelligent life to evolve, that might be exceedingly rare.
And that brings us to the author's own, very sober conclusion, which I'll read directly from the paper. These findings suggest that Earth may host the only technological civilization within its cosmic horizon. Given the analysis, this is what the author believes we can responsibly say.
This leaves us with one final and really profound question to ponder. If this analysis is even in the right ballpark, it suggests that the great silence we hear from the cosmos isn't a warning about our future. It's a testament to our unbelievably improbable past. It implies that we might not be just one civilization among many, but a statistical anomaly, a rare, brief flicker of consciousness in a vast and silent universe. What does it mean if we're the ones who made it through?